Okay, hello. This is part two of a two-part series where I paint the box Underworld's Wind Hollow or something along those lines. Um, Now, these are the Tzeentch. They're Ephelim Pandemonium. Um, Weird old name that's hard to say. Boy. Now I left these till last because although these are the reason why I bought the box in the first place, I am terrified of these. They look so much more complicated now that I've got them in person, full of just overlapping arms and legs, and I'm worried I can't really do them justice. But I have a plan, I think. Now, just like in the last project, I'm going to be theming it around the bonus deck instead of the one that's supposed to be played with these guys. And that's Seismic Shock. So, I'm not entirely sure, I haven't read all of these cards, I've only really just looked at the artwork. It seems to be a lot of very different magic stuff. Now, I can do that, that's fine. And I'm kind of theming them around more kind of grounded, a little bit more kind of realistic, I guess. Instead of being these bright blue Tzeentch magic people, I think my goal is to make them kind of uncanny, kind of modern horror, Silent Hill-esque horror creatures. Because the main character, I assume, is Ephelim. Ephelim's pretty horrific as it is, so let's see if I can make it look just god awful, really. And with that in mind, my plan is now set. Let's start working on it. So these are my three colors to go with. I'm gonna make the patchy skin using these three, and the way I'm gonna do that is by combining all three of them to make three unique colors. This adds kind of a continuity between the three of them, meaning they all kind of look like they belong with each other because they all have the same kind of blending potential because they're all compound of the three key colors. So the way I'm going to do this is by making 2 drops of each and then dropping another drop in to make 3 new colors. Now they're all going to be pretty similar. But that's kind of the best way to make kind of a patchy skin tone. I should have a light, a medium, and a dark, kind of at a minimum, really. Now, I picked the 3 colors quite specifically. I went for a dark reddy brown, a yellowy white, and then a kind of tanned skin color. This should create kind of a darker kind of tanned skin tone, with a slightly less saturation because of the yellowy white will kind of counteract some of the pinky notes in the other colors, reducing the saturation, which is kind of what I'm going for. Now, my goal is to make worn, damaged skin, which is why I'm putting so much effort into making these look as good as they can. Now, I'm a big fan of painting skin tones, so this is kind of perfect for me. Part of the reason why I was drawn to these guys in the first place, there's not a lot of skin in 40k. That's a weird thing to say, really, isn't it? Now, I'm not gonna lie, this took quite a while. Constantly going between the 3 different colors. I'm blending them a little bit on the brush, so there's more than just 3 tones that I'm making. It's gonna be varied across the whole thing because I almost never wash my brush during this process, only if I feel like maybe it's drying on the brush, or some of the paint needs watering down again. Whilst going through these, I realized I wasn't using enough of the light color. So what I started doing is going back over just a couple of the models just to give them some variation between them. But things like this weird floaty thing, I kind of do speckles, almost kind of like patchy freckles, like near connectors and just kind of where it felt relevant, really. Picking and choosing the spots was also based on bits that I'd missed. If I saw any grey bits, I was like, oh, that bit needs some freckles on it, I guess. And hey, that's all the skin done. This took quite a while, but in the grand scheme of things, this is all like what, maybe a third of the entire project. It's kind of almost the whole of 2 or 3 of them, if you think about it. Like this guy here is like, it's gonna be that, the teeth, the glowy smell stuff, whatever you want to call that, the 2 fireballs that he's currently holding, and then the ground, and he'll be done. As for this little tiny guy, I've got to do, yeah, pretty much the same thing, but he's also tiny. He's like so close to being done. But we're not finished with the skin yet. I'm pretty happy with how this is going, but it needs a shade added to it, right? So my plan is to mix a little bit of Peachy Flesh and Gravelord Grey and some Speed Paint Medium. This is going to add some contrast and add some shadows to the models. I'm pretty happy with how this turns out because it brings everything darker. Right now they're quite kind of pastel, and they need something additional added to it. I'm a big fan of doing little kind of shadowy washes. This is just a great way of making a base coat look more 3D. I typically do extremely thin looking washes because I'm not a huge fan of like heavy contrast. Now I'm going probably more dense than I normally do. I wouldn't put this thick of a shadow on, but I want the model itself to look darker anyway, so this is just kind of like a plus to be honest. And this is what they look like. I'm really happy with how these look right now. There's some really nice flesh tones to be added to these models. They're looking a little uncomfortably skin-like. They're very clearly supposed to look more alien than this. I've taken a very human approach to something that's not supposed to look that human.
Okay, so these are exactly what I had in my head, right? This is almost the perfect kind of skin. The only problem is that I have little to no direction of where to go next, right? I knew I wanted this, right? I wanted this, but I don't know about the rest of it, right? Just that bit, or in the case of this guy, just the most of it, right? Or I guess he's even better, right? The whole of it. I don't know what to do the bands. I don't know what to do the funny little eyeballs. Yeah, I can't believe I've gotten this far without even having that much inspiration whatsoever. So we're gonna wing it. Because how bad can that go?
I showed them to my friend and his reply was, "Oh god, no, what have you done? Ryan, what did you do?" And honestly, that's what I was going for. Yep. Dealing mental damage to my opponents. That's how I win. And he was the person that was like, these look very Silent Hill. And I hadn't really thought that. To be honest, that I hadn't made that connection, not until he kind of pointed it out, which is why I'm kind of taking the clothing in a very Silent Hill-esque direction. Now, if you don't know what Silent Hill is, it's a horror game for the PS2, and everything's covered in dried, crusty blood. And that's why I'm going to do the fabric. I'm going to make it just look like it's been well covered in goo and gunk for years. And I think that's all you really can do in this situation. Because I had no better ideas. Now I'm starting with a contrast paint of white. This should help make it look a little bit more fabric-like. Now the Zenithal didn't really reach that much, So I'm trying my best to add more texture to this before I start adding kind of blood and grime onto it. And I'm not sure it really did that much. It was basically a grey contrast on grey primer, so it wasn't too effective. And whilst that dried, I worked on painting all of the feathers and or spikes. I kind of lumped them all in together for the moment, but I will put a different kind of contrasty wash over the top, yeah. Now, the way I'm doing it is I've got a kind of 50-50 split of a bright ivory and a warm grey. Now, I'm doing the vast majority in warm grey and then just kind of wet blending a quick dab of the bright ivory over the top. This should add highlights to the end of all of the spikes and all of the feathers. This will look hopefully a lot more effective the moment I put any kind of contrast or something over the top of it. And in the time that it took me to do all of that work, it's fully dry now. So I'm going to do a quick dry brush of some of the bright ivory just because it's still on my wet palette, and it will be absolutely fine for this kind of job. Now, it's a pretty loaded dry brush. This is a good way of doing it, especially if you're trying to make kind of like worn out fabric looks, because it has more scuff marks and it will leave like big long streaks. Now, it does mean that the chances of something horrific happening and ruining everything is fairly high, but you just kind of take that risk, especially when you're making kind of like stuff that's going to look old and gross anyway. You can just fix it with patchwork later if it goes terribly wrong.
And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to patch on loads and loads of kind of like dried and crusty blood stuff with this. This is my brush. I'm going to use that. And it should look pretty good. Hoping it's going to look good.
So I've just kind of balled it up and I'm going to start putting the blood stuffs on. Right, I'm going to start with like a really bright mixture. This is going to be like your fresh blood stuff. And then what I'm going to slowly do is add, I've got murder scene, I've got mummified grime, and I think I've got hardened leather there. I can't remember. And I'm going to mix this in with this bright red mixture that I've already made. And this should go all through the different kind of colors that like blood stuff does when it gets slowly more and more aged over time. It's going to be a little bit purple, it's going to be a little bit orange, it's also going to be quite a bit brown, and this little kind of fuzzy bit of filter will be pretty effective at making it look kind of non-deliberate, in kind of patchy sections with harsh edges. And that's kind of what you kind of want from kind of blood stuff stains.
Okay, so this is the blood. As you can see, it's pretty caked on. Now, I realized pretty early on that I definitely shouldn't have gone with grey, right? Like, I should have put something else over it. I would have, if I had one, I would have used like a pastel yellow, because I kind of need it to be almost like sweat stained. I need it to be like that off-white, yellowy kind of dinginess. That would have worked a lot better with this blood. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glaze on some, I've got some yellow. So what I'll do is I'll glaze that on instead. And that should look better. I'm hoping it'll look better. If not, I'll just go back over it with blood and I'll glaze the recesses with something dark instead. That's kind of a foolproof fallback when I eventually have to do it, because I'm probably going to mess this up. Yeah, let's see how it goes.
So when it comes to glazing, I tend to like Army Painter paints a lot more than my Monument hobby paints. This is simply just because they have less pigment. They glaze a lot better, but it doesn't stop the first layer being absolutely terrifying. Now, I end up with like too strong of a yellowy mixture in the first bit. I have to dilute it a lot more, but the way kind of glazing works is you just kind of slowly add more and more pigment over time, over the course of tens or hundreds of layers, and it can be quite cathartic when you like actually like get down to doing it. But it's the first couple that are like the most nerve-wracking part of glazing, in my opinion. So one of the things that I really needed to work on, however, is just the color of yellow is definitely wrong. I know that for sure now, but I thought that when going into it. So what I've got here is a bright ivory. I'm gonna make kind of like the highlights with this. Now, I don't think I need to do kind of like an interim one. Like, I don't need to mix the two together to make kind of a middle color, which I think normally you would want to do if you were doing kind of like a glaze blend mix. This is just going to be for the very like top highlights. As you can see, it's basically just like very, very thin lines. I'm doing a couple of like little stripy bits as well. This should kind of make it look a little bit more like a fabric sort of thing, but it is what it is, really is kind of the last little step in an attempt to kind of save the rest of the design, to be honest. Now, I'm not going to try and hide it. This isn't really what I was thinking of. I don't really know at this point, like I'm very, very tempted to just kind of repaint this. It's not quite what I'm doing. So in an attempt to kind of do like the last step, the last attempt to kind of make it what I want, I'm just going to do the blood again. Over the top, hopefully this should leave a little bit of the highlight details present and it should look a lot better, hopefully. So we're going again. I've got the little bit of fuzz and we're starting with the bright reds and then going through all different kinds of colors to get the aged effect on it. Now, I just don't think this style is quite what I was wanting. It takes a little bit away from the skin, which I think is supposed to be one of the main visual parts of this. Like, I want this to be kind of like a background element, but with these really bright yellows, is kind of standing out way, way, way too much. And also it just kind of reminds me of just like melted pizza. The bright yellows and the dark reds, I mean, it's just kind of like pepperoni, I think, at this point. So my goal is to kind of steer away from that, I think. Now, it took me a couple of days to kind of get over it. But I'm just kind of moving on with what I'm doing. So I'm going to paint all the feathery parts this bright blue. I'm kind of just bringing back the association towards Tzeentch. Now, my goal was to make them as least Tzeentch as possible, but when it comes to the choice of colors, I'm just going to lean into with a couple of the elements, and it should still make for like a quite nice design. Now it's time to move on to like one of the more interesting bits. Literally, the vast majority of these guys have some form of magic on them. Other than like the little like weird fish thing with an eye in its face, the tentacly horror machine thing, whatever, they all have magic, which means I need to learn how to do good fireballs and quick. So, to follow the kind of Tzeentch style design that I was going for, the one with teeth all around it, I'm gonna make the fireballs pink and blue. This should be a good way of bringing it back to Tzeentch, but also, like, there's so few elements on this character's design that I'm not sure what else I could do other than making the skin blue or pink. I think this is a good compromise, so I'm happy to give it a go. So we're gonna start with some of the brightest speed paints I have, mixed with some fluorescent paint. I got a full range of fluorescent paints, so I've got fluorescent pink, I've got fluorescent blue. I just need to kind of make a good speed paint to go along with it. I wasn't really happy with the blue speed paints I've got when it comes to kind of the bright kind of sapphire Tzeentch colours. So I try my best to make my own, and it's a little less saturated than I would have wanted, which is kind of surprising considering it has fluorescent paint in it. Now, whilst I've got these two paints out, I'm going to take the opportunity to make the main character the same way. Now, he has like a thing in his hand that goes through all the different colours according to kind of like the art that's on the front cover. But I'm just going to make it blue and pink. I think that's totally fine. And he's got two kind of like friends with him that I'm not quite sure if they're supposed to be magic or if they're supposed to be kind of monster-esque. I think they're supposed to be a mixture of the two, but I'm going to make them kind of blue-pink as well. Now I'm going to take the advantage and put some magenta over the bloodstains that I accidentally got on them whilst I was making the skirt. Yeah, skirt? Yeah, it's a skirt. I don't know. Now, in order to make the magic look a little bit more glowy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix titanium white with the fluorescent paints to make kind of like a super bright fluorescent paint. And I'm going to slack brush this on as a way of kind of increasing kind of like the brightness of it. If you want something to look really bright, you've kind of got to bring it to white. And this is kind of like the first step in order to do that. I'm gonna just kind of brush everything that's supposed to be pink with this, and then I've got another blue one that I'll do all of the blue stuff with, and that's the easiest way of doing this kind of step. Now, after I do that, I'm going to quickly go over with just the fluorescent paints. They're really transparent and they're really thin. This is just to kind of make everything look a lot more fluorescent, make everything look a lot more brighter. But then I'll dry brush that again with just pure titanium white, which will bring it to that white, and that should make it look really glowy, kind of fingers crossed. Now, one of the things I'm just going to kind of skip past is that I've started putting green on the birdie kind of guy, and I've started putting kind of like a yellowy orange on the small little fella. That's going to be their kind of form of magic, and whilst that dries as just kind of like a quick kind of like end of day thing, I'm going to start doing the bases. So I've got this kind of like yellowy golden brown that I've mixed with a little bit of ivory to bring it even kind of brighter, and I'm just going to cover the entire base in that kind of color. Now, I know full well that this isn't the kind of color that I want on these guys, but I'm gonna dry brush these with the bright ivory, and then I'm gonna cover it in like a hardened leather mixed with a prismatic bolt. This should give kind of like a greeny dark brown wash to these guys, and it should make them look really kind of antique and aged. Now, this is gonna be like my style of bases for these guys. I really want the characters to be the main focus, so I'm just going to make kind of a little bit more on a generic side basic color for these. I'm not going to do anything more than that, because I want things like the magic to really show up. I want the designs, I want the bright bits to show up, but I don't care about the bases on these guys, which is why I'm just going to do them all one color. I'm going to do all one speed paint, and they'll look at least passable. I don't really want them to be noticed, so I'll just do that. One of the things I really like to keep in mind when I make things is kind of what do you want the main focus of the design to be. With these guys, it definitely feels like a no-brainer. They've got so much kind of magic-y stuff going on that that's clearly supposed to be the main appeal. So in order to kind of do that kind of magic-y stuff justice, I've got to make sure it looks good, and I've got to make sure it's kind of bright and vibrant, and that can be quite a lot of pressure, especially because I'm not used to doing a lot of kind of like bright magic-y stuff. It's a very short list of the stuff that I've done before this, so it's definitely like a lot of pressure to get that looking good. And speaking of pressure, another thing that I've barely never done is object source lighting, which I don't really think I can get away with not doing that on these guys. They all have very bright lights because they're all holding fireballs, which means there's always going to be a lot of light being cast onto them via this. Now, I would much prefer not to do that, but I feel like it's kind of like a missed opportunity to learn, especially when it's like staring you in the face with these models. Just everything's holding a fireball. Like, I can't not get away with doing it. Okay, so I think we're kind of in the final step. I'm gonna work on the eyeballs. So I think because these are all kind of little monstery guys, I've got a good idea of what I want to do. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint them all black. I'm gonna varnish them over with something shiny, and then I'm going to add on some chameleon colors, which will make them look kind of bright and glittery and kind of animal-esque. And then what I'll do is I'll just kind of do like a singular black stripe down the middle, which is going to be probably like one of the finest kind of like freehand details I've done to date. But I kind of feel like it's necessary for these guys. It should make them look a lot more animalistic, which I feel like they're in need of. And honestly, I think that's these guys done. Now these guys took a lot more time than the other guys, and that's mostly just because A, there's 5 of them, B, I care a lot more about the designs of these guys specifically, and C, they're a lot more complicated, or at least, well, the biggest guy is a lot more complicated. I don't think they're all collectively as complicated as the Stormcaster turtles, but anyway, I really like these guys. Now I've chosen to keep kind of the cape and stuff. I think that's going to be kind of like the main aspect that I'm not a huge fan of. However, like, now that I've done all of the details, I don't really find myself looking at it that much, which I guess is a big plus, right? I didn't want it to be a focal thing, and thanks to doing all of kind of like the blues and pinks and bringing it back to Tzeentch, really helps kind of take away from the element that I'm not a huge fan of. And I can't help feel like I'm hyper focusing on like the one element that I don't like. I'm really liking these guys. I hope I've done them justice. I'm pretty proud of these ones. And for some of the elements being kind of like my first time, yeah, like maybe in the future I'll think that like I've gone like way past these, but for now these are kind of like the best that I think I could have done them. The bird one I am super happy with. The object source lighting on one side of his face, along with kind of just that kind of like bony structure, I think he looks super intimidating and super kind of like interesting, and honestly I'm just like 100% happy with the design, which is super rare, right? There's always something that I don't like, and I think to me he perfect. I love him. He beautiful. The little 4-legged fiend, like, I'm super happy with the lighting of the 2 fireballs. Like, the blue and pinkness of it really do help bring it back to Tzeentch, which on a model was almost completely impossible. Now, I did realize later on that the floor's supposed to be on fire. I'm just gonna choose to ignore that. That's just now sand deposits. Cause yeah, no, screw doing that. I have better things to do, I think. And last but not least, the weird tentacle guy. I'm also really happy. He's definitely the most basic of all of them, which is kind of funny to think of considering how small one of these guys is. Now, could I have put more work into him? Yeah, probably, but I'm also really happy with how he currently looks. I think he just looks super weird, and the eye really does help sell it, to be honest. Without that, he definitely looked a lot more kind of soulless. I'm super glad that, like, over the course of all of these guys, they have like an element of continuity between all of them. The kind of same flesh tone and the different colors of magic all kind of bring them together as like one team that looks like a team, which means I'm super happy with how these turned out. Anyway, that's the video. I can't believe we hit 30 minutes, especially when the first part of this was like sub 15. Yeah, let me know what you think. Stick around if you want to stick around, and I'll see you in the next video.